Hello. Welcome everyone on internet land, I should say. Sylph Dominic Hawkins coming to you live on Friday night. Be sure to check the date. Oh, Friday the 23rd of October, 2020. It is bang on 8 o'clock, and you'll notice that I am coming to you live from the Dojo, from Rainy Spirit Dojo, headquarters, Hoshinden Jutaijutsu. Things have slightly eased into the restrictions here in Melbourne, and so we can be out beyond 5 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, whatever the curfew was. And the kilometre range is extended, so I'm back in the dojo. The weather is warm, beautiful tonight, humid, and I'm back to start re-inhabiting the space. I'm looking forward over the next couple of months to be able to welcome you guys back as well, but we'll get to that. So tonight's session is a follow-on. This is Hoshinden Philosophy and Theory session 18, I think. We're going to roll back to some of the phase discussions that I started about 2 months ago, because I then went on a huge tangent, podcast interviews, numerous awesome podcasts, a whole selection of other bits and pieces, and then some other philosophy talks I wanted to throw in, specifically last week's values and ideals. So now we're jumping back. We're going to talk about clay and lightning phase in tonight's session. If you look back through the videos, you'll notice that there's a session on earth and wind phase, fire and water phase, mist and metal phase, and tonight we're going to look at clay and lightning phase. We'll talk about them, go over the same kind of brief that I did in the previous videos, discuss the qualities as I see them, and then talk about the manifestations of that through martial arts and on a practical level. So, kicking things off, I hope that you're well, and people will join over the next couple of minutes. At the dojo, I had a black belt class today. I've been running just small sections. We can run one instructor and 2 students. So I've been running just some black belt only classes under that format. And one of the discussions that came up today in the group, just a little chit chat, was about, and it was right at the end, it was about how, it's a bit ageist, it was about how this whole downtime that we've had, most of the students, we haven't been in the dojo for months. The first closure of the dojo was the 27th of March this year. We had that 2.5-week reprieve in June. There are some students who haven't attended for that entire chunk. You know, they last attended class mid-March at the start of the year. So that was 7 months ago. And just because you can't come to class doesn't mean that martial arts is over. That the dojo, this building this isn't Hoshinden. Yeah, this is just some walls and a roof. It's great. It's a type of home, but home can be established, wherever the heart is. And so these walls and this space, this isn't the art. This is just the dojo, but it's not the art form. You're at home. You have full opportunity to contemplate. You don't even have to study as such. It's not like you have to put on the videos, watch me. There's like 50 hours of these things. You might not want to do that. But if you go outside and you find that life is tricky, you take a breath and then you put to work your practice, put to work your study. What is it that you've been studying the last 10 years? Those of you who've been studying with me for a decade, what have you actually learned? Maybe don't answer that question. The point being that you've been able to continue your martial art journey this whole time. Sure, you haven't been able to maybe jump around and throw people over tables or grab weapons off the wall, but there's nothing stopping you applying your values, nothing stopping you applying your philosophy and finding the intersection of where that actually assists you in your life, your day-to-day life. Maybe that's your strategic concept of dealing with other people. You still have conflict. Maybe you've had issues with family members. You've been trapped at home with them for the last 7 months. Maybe you've had issues with work colleagues or employees or employers. All of that still applies. Just don't think that just because you're not here in the space, that somehow, you just press pause, you put martial arts over there in a box, you'll get back to that. Because I guarantee you'll never get back to that. If that sits in a box on a shelf for 6 months, you're cooked. If that was really how that worked, yeah, it's like if you're playing violin, you pick up violin, and you don't really develop a passion for it, or a relationship, or a dialogue with the instrument, and then you get an opportunity to just not go to your teacher for a year. You're like, oh, thank God, I don't have to go and study violin for 6 months. At the end of that 6 months, you're not going to pick that up again. That's just on this shelf. So hopefully what you found is that your own longing and passion and interest for whatever it is you've been studying all these years keeps popping up to the surface, and you keep wanting to engage, you keep wanting to find opportunities to explore that. These perfect opportunities. I've been providing these videos as generating, like it's not even a conversation, it's just one-way monologuing, but to continue to provide a seed of thought and some poking and some tickling around some thoughts, some ideas, some trains of imagination that we can travel down. Because I don't know what your lives are like at home. I don't know what situations you've been finding yourself in. But hopefully you've been able to apply these experiences. And if things have been difficult, things have been hard. And I've heard from some of the students over this time, and some of the students have had some impressively difficult experiences. And my hope is that they have found, two of them have specifically said, they found that in the middle of the storm, they found that they could breathe and just kind of reevaluate, gain some traction and some solid ground again inside of themselves, and then start from there. And I would say that is success, total success. What else have you been studying really, other than how to orient the middle of yourself in some advantageous way, physically, emotionally, mentally, in relationship to others, in relationship to your own fallacies, in relationship to all of our own faults. You reorient yourself so that you're standing on stable ground. There's martial arts strategy. It's used towards yourself. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that martial arts strategy is used against other people and they're the enemy. Yeah. It's always an introspection and a dialogue with the devil. And when you find out who the devil is, you work out the devil is us. I'm the common denominator of all of my life problems. So it's worth me engaging myself, the internal workings of my narrative, to attempt to understand how that is so and what I might want to alter if I'm really not enjoying my experience. Maybe it's time to alter it. And I don't mean alter it as in go and force other people to do what I want. I mean alter the experience that I'm having. How do you alter the experience that you are having, other than by changing the perspective from which you view that experience? If you are having a very difficult time with someone, then what are the conditions that you put into place that make that time difficult? What are the conditions, through which perspective and through which lens are you observing that and critiquing and judging the experiences of that day to day and moment by moment, which are making it difficult? Is it possible for you to peer through a lens that either has a different perspective or a broader perspective, or looks at it with a different value system, and allows you to discover either that actually everything you want is right there, or if not, do something about it. But certainly don't sit back over the year and think, oh, well, I can't train in martial arts because the dojo's closed. Oh, I can't eat well because, the farmers' markets are half the number they were. So I'll just eat crap for 7 months. But then as soon as things go back to normal, I'll start eating well again. We laugh at that concept. So we have to copy that across, yeah? I'll put personal development over there on the shelf. I'll get back to that later. When everything's fine and I can go out clubbing again, well, then I'll take that back off the shelf. So after that little rant, let's get on to tonight's topic. I hope you guys are well. Clay and lightning phase. These are sections of the secondary phases. So we've got the primary phases, the secondary phases, and the tertiary phases. And the secondary phases are relationships that, again, are 90-degree opposed to each other. It's just that they sit 30-degree opposed to the primaries, and vice versa for or as such, like a quid pro quo for the tertiaries. The tertiary phases are 90 degrees opposed to each other and 30-degree offset from the secondary phases. And so this is how each of these layers work. There's 3 layers: primary layer, secondary layer, tertiary layer. And they work on different sections of 3-dimensional space. So the primary layer is really, really interested in kind of horizontal motion, horizontal movements in relationship to some reference point, an attacker, a north line. And then the secondary phases are really interested in 45 diagonal and degrees relationships. So now we're starting to gain like an x-axis plane. And then the tertiaries are really interested in the vertical plane. So up, down movements, above and below. And the 3 layers build a sphere through which we can interpret 3-dimensional, experience and interaction. And then in the martial arts setting, self-defense. Tonight, I want to start with clay. So clay's on the contracting side. I keep looking here. I don't know if you guys can see. I can show you the door. The awesome painted door wheel. Da-da-da. Still shining well. That is when the sun shines through it. Right now it's raining at night times. That doesn't work. And so clay, that wheel, I won't show you again. It divides in half. We've got contracting phases and experiences and expanding phases and experience. One isn't good or bad. They're just contextual. So clay is over on the contracting side, and it's internal, it's reductive, it's descending, it's diminishing. Its interest is in really grinding the foundations into powder. So if you've got a huge column, massive column, and there's something at the top that you want, you could climb up to the top and grab it, or you could take out the column, which is propping it up. That's what's holding it up there. Pros and cons. Maybe the thing that's up there will be destroyed in the process of you taking out the column. That's a risk you have to weigh up. But if we now consider the human, the being, the identification of the human sits on the top of this column, and the column being the form and the structure, the physical structure. And then the identification of the individual, where the expression of some form of values or righteousness or some sort of particular agenda, that's from the identified self. So imagine that sits like a little ball on top of this column. You're able to take out the column. You can bring down that identification, that point that's actually what's the word? It's at that point that's driving the machine. Yeah, the commands are all coming from there. The hand doesn't do anything without that driving behind it. So you can think about it as in deconstructing the strength of the body, or deconstructing the structure of the body, so that you can almost level out the playing field. So on a physical level, that makes sense. If you're a smaller defender, a higher, taller attacker, well, you're going to want to level out that playing field. You're going to be taking out the knees, taking out the lower joints, trying to get them to overstep, and that stepping, that triangle parting reduces the height so that you could actually be on a somewhat equal height playing field. But even emotionally and mentally, if someone is surviving in their attitude up on a pedestal, it's out of reach. Well, the question could be, what is the pedestal? How can I deconstruct the pedestal so that it brings the conversation back to a homogeneous position? So if we were to look at that in the workplace, the example would be that the employee, that was very Australian, the employee and the employer are on different hierarchical levels. That's the way that works, because the hierarchy of distribution of communication from the top down. So, and distribution of information from the bottom up, but that's a totally different discussion. If there was a particular discussion, let's say it's moved beyond a workplace discussion. This is now it's some conversation or some argument between someone in a higher position of employment and a lower position of employment has now turned into a personal argument. Well, the columns, that little column that the person might be hiding on top of, that no longer applies, because now the discussion is entirely personal. It might be about human traits or human character traits, in which case everyone's on the same level. And so in a conversation, you could wrap your head around that perspective and engage that person on the equal level of human. Now we're arguing about humans and humans, as opposed to a particular set of policies or expectations. That's a different kind of framework. Don't know if that's helpful. If you think about that in relationships, in personal relationships and intimate relationships, and it's the same is true of the family, but if we start talking about that just in terms of partnerships and intimate relationships between adults, then do you really want a relationship like that? Like, if you really think about what that would actually entail, or would you prefer your interpersonal relationships to be on even ground, so that the partner that you choose as an intimate partner, you would, I can imagine more ideally, engaging with someone who you mutually respect. There's a mutual respect between the two of you, and that there isn't a background agenda of hierarchy in the relationship, because that's an inappropriate framework for that to play out. So it would be, hey, we're all humans. I have great things about me. I have terrible things about me. You have great things about you. You have terrible things about you. And let's mix and dialogue, together on that kind of plane. If someone was unwilling to do that, or they wanted to continue to instill some kind of gap, and that was in an intimate relationship, you've got to think, well, that just doesn't apply. That's a completely incorrect context for that kind of framework. So you'd be really curious to question the motivation of that, and whether it's going to lead to anything that person even wants, because that would be just bizarre. If we are looking at that in a martial arts setting, the way that clay plays out is it wants to deconstruct the legs, primarily. Deconstruct from the ankles and the knee joints and the hip, so that it can reduce the ability for the form to strike. If you can take out the knees of the attacker, or the other opponent, roll the ankles, take out the knees, kick or dislocate the knees, or sublux, or kick the mid-thigh so that it locks out the leg. In whatever way, there's lots of different methods, but what we want to do is remove the ability for the legs in total, from the feet to the hips, to be able to be used against you. Maybe that means that it offsets the balance so that they can't kick you, or that it throws them off balance, it throws them forward, you kick out the thigh, the legs lock out, the hips roll back, and the head throws forward. Whatever, it might be lots of different ways that you get about that. But the primary goal that you're reaching for, is to be able to cut off the connection between the ground and the punch, or the ground and the grab, or the headbutt, or whatever it is. Even just the sense of confidence that the attacker might have by standing on the ground. If they're floating in midair, unable to make traction because there's nothing to push against, suddenly they might find that their confidence just starts vaporizing quite rapidly. We really underestimate, as humans, how much we use the ground, and we push off the ground on so many levels, not just physically, I mean emotionally, mentally. We don't often have a grasp of how many character traits and qualities and how much opportunity we see or we take that relies on the solidity of the ground, relies on the structure, and that we need the ground to be there for us. If our legs give way and we're just a heap on the ground, it's harder to muster hate. It's harder to muster rage in that kind of direction. Well, you can probably stew in your own head, but it's harder to get something that's going to move forward as an attack. So clay is super interested in the legs and the feet and the ankles and the knees. Kicking, striking, sweeping, all those kinds of ideas. Lightning, which is 180-degree pose, so lightning's really interested in the opposite. Lightning's really interested in the head. And I won't even say necessarily different from Chitsukafuku, different from the stupa. I'm not talking about the identification or the identified self. I mean like the physical head. The ears, the hair, the eyes, the bowling ball, shakugan. Lightning's really interested in the way the head can be manipulated and can offset the shoulders and the harmony of the hips and the knees, and that the body will follow where the head moves, usually. So lightning's interested in causing the head to look up and down. It moves left and right so that the eyes track. And as the eyes track, the chin tends to change direction. And that's going to alter the way the shoulders are lined up in relationship to the hips. If someone's dead straight on and the shoulders are lined up with the hips and they've got a lot of belly structure, they could really engage the core. And then you cause them to turn, and they turn all this, but the hips are still facing forward. Well, now you've made it much harder for them to engage core. You've made it much harder for them to drive forward because they're split. They've got half their body facing one direction, or structured ready to face one direction, and then half their body and their intention heading in the opposite direction. So you're able to undermine their strength in that way. Lightning uses things such as quick movements up and down. Now we're talking about these 45-degree angles again. It can jump up, jump down, and try to literally cause the attacker to change the angle of the head, look up, their weight goes back, shoulders fall back behind the hips, look down, the chin comes forward, the shoulders roll forward in front of the hips, so that you can rock the individual in this way. And if you're going to jump up, throw them back, and then kick out at the chest when their shoulders are already back, well then it's going to be much harder for them to respond to that, retaliate. If you've managed to draw them forward and that chin's down, they're looking forward and they're slightly forward leaning over hips over their shoulders over their hips, then it's going to be way easier to grab them, to pull them, to take satemi, to drop them into the ground and then end up in some kind of get them face first planted. So it depends what you're trying to achieve. Lightning tends to use very conspicuous oscillation in order to achieve that. So lightning's like, while clay is like, right, hit them, bash, smack, slam, take out the legs, side kick, mule kick out the knees, really quite solid. It's like hurling, not even mud. It's like getting balls of mud and then drying them, just hurling them at someone. It's super solid. Lightning's more like flashing lights. Lots and lots of information all over the place. Kind of confusing, kind of distracting. And you get people to off balance because they lose grasp of the center of the relationship. If I'm standing here and someone's standing here, it's obvious where the center of the relationship is. There's a no man's land between us, and then depending on what kind of experience people want, they'll try to control the no man's land, in the middle. If someone evacuates and this person just moves into the no man's land, they take control of that and the no man's land moves in this kind of space. If this changes so that this individual simply crouches down, the no man's land might actually shrink in terms of size or space, so that it compresses between the two individuals, and maybe this person on the lower end, they're preparing for something, or they're going to, football tackle or take out underneath, or fireman lift, or whatever it is that they're planning on doing. It's like, how can you confuse the other person about what the space is that's under attack? Or maybe I'll go with that. So some of the techniques we have in lightning, and some of you, the students who remember these, you'll know these, where we have things like the escape from opposite wrist grab, attempted opposite wrist grab, attempted, in quotation. Someone goes to reach in, it's just moving so that their fingertips may just make a reach, but they don't get a grip. And as they continue, because their fingertips are there and the timing is such, they overreach, overextend. You've rotated, you've turned, they've overextended. into the trap where now you're pressing up against the side of their knee and you're controlling the side of the neck or the head. And it's really simple. They've fallen right into this space. Yeah, they thought that the no man's land that was up for grabs. They thought that was the relationship between their hand and your arm. And as you move that relationship, the no man's land moved with it, and they kept tracking that. They didn't realize that their legs were left behind, or that you had moved into that space with your feet, but meanwhile you're evacuating that space with your arms. So we use those in lightning to be able to create confusion. And lightning's all about, if we come up with keywords, lightning's like distracting, confusing, disorienting, upsetting, enraging. It can be quite annoying if you've got so much. Think about when your children are all talking to you at once. And that's not necessarily a calming experience. That's a just homicidal experience when everyone's talking to you all at the same time. That's overwhelming. It's quite enraging. So lightning tends to have this very heating effect. It's very uplifting, but I mean it in the literal sense. I don't mean it in terms of its happy analogy. It's very shoulders lift and people grit their body because they've lost sense of the center. Clay tends to just ride in one line, one direction. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to attack. Bash, 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 bash. Smash, 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 smash. So it's not confusing. Clay is quite solid. We're doing the keywords for clay. Solid, solidifying, structured. Annoying. That'd definitely be one for clay. Really annoying. Painful would be another one. Bludgeoning. Not even necessarily penetrative, just bludgeoning, kind of like ouch. And its goals are all out on the open. It's super upfront about what it wants. It's trying to just, it's that axe just hacking away at the tree trunk, and it's just undermining the structure of the tree because for whatever purpose, maybe it wants the acorns up at the top. When the two come into play in martial arts, what tends to happen is clay in like a kata relationship, clay goes in to attack the upper body and to start striking to send it back and then start kicking. And at the same time it does that, lightning is busy distracting. So if you can imagine like you've got the face here and clay's getting ready to strike and clay goes, yeah, and then the face moves. I fell off my perch. If you're like, yeah, hit me, whoa. Clay has to make a decision between which of the goals, because it's only got one option. It's like, kill. So it has to decide between them. If you play your cards right, this is all part of that. Ooh, kuno kara, yeah. Then what you're able to draw out of clay is to attack the wrong target. So that people overstrike at the face where you were, and then they move, and then the strikes land into the hand. It's a very, very basic example. You can kind of follow along. And then from that, they've effectively wasted that strike and exposed themselves vulnerably in doing that, because you have to commit for the attack. You don't get to attack in that particular way and keep all your cards secret. That doesn't work. That you'd just be waiting, and nothing would ever happen. At some point, you have to make a stand and then make public your intention. So they overcommit, and meanwhile, the lightning person is using this distraction to just draw clay over in that position. But then when lightning tries to sneak in, and potentially start doing this 45-degree diagonal relationship, jumps down and tries to take control of the legs, clay's solid. So even though clay was distracted and it might have followed into a false target, it's strong in its structure. It's not fiery. It's not over leaning or anything like that. So its ability to just suddenly turn and knee the lightning person in the face is fully intact. And again, what lightning would have to do to counter that is to provide a false story. It's like, ooh, look over here, bang. All those kinds of things. That all comes from lightning concepts. We go, what's the time? Bash. elbow. Don't hurt me, crack, elbow up at the face. Ed Martin always used to say his old man skills, where he'd be like, stop hitting me, please, please, I'm just an old man. And meanwhile, he's driving his elbow up your face. But and this brings into a longer discussion about observation of others in public. We'll talk about that a bit later. So in Ed's example, it's about the distraction is throwing words out there. No, please, I'm a helpless old man. The distraction is words, throwing that out. Meanwhile, what they're not seeing is that the elbow is punching them in the face repeatedly, or breaking the nose, or whatever it is, or even just striking into the chest and causing. It's hard for the individual to drive forward on that. So it can be as kind of woo as that, or as simple as very basic, like look over here, twinkle the fingers, and kick them. Whoop, ash. Look them in the eye, and then look at your hand and punch them with the other one. Look them in the eye, draw that hand back, you're going to punch them and kick them with the lead leg. Those are examples of how lightning plays out that little throwing. It's all false mirrors, really. If you think about lightning, devastating, there's another keyword for it, devastating, but confusing. So there might be lots of flashes. You're not entirely sure how to defend against that. You're out in a middle of a storm on a mountaintop for whatever reason, carrying a massive, metal antenna. There's a high chance that you're going to be quite devastated by that. If you're just out and you're not carrying your antenna, and there's just lots of flashes, and you're trying to find safety, it could be confusing. You're not sure when or where the strikes will actually appear from, which makes them very hard to defend against. There's a note. So if I go and I talk now about clay and lightning, metaphorically, how they play out together in our lives. If you think of clay, we'll talk about some interpersonal situations that explain that. Think about clay personality, people who kind of exhibit clay qualities. Those are people who they tend to be, all their cards are on the table. So terrible at poker. But they tend to be very upfront. Come on in. Very like, this is how it is. This is what I want. This is what I want to get. Rah. And then they'll head in that direction, all guns blazing, with probably quite great strength behind them, but not necessarily a lot of strategy, or not necessarily a range of variable tactics in case the strategy changes, in case the thing that they were fighting turns out to be just an illusion. Yeah. If the thing that they were striking actually turns out to just be a false flag, it was never a thing. When you think about people who play that out, who there's always maybe something, they're moving, they're rallying troops behind them, and then they're attacking en masse, very public, they get up and make speeches about this, or they really tell you to their face how that is. That could be a very clay perspective. They're very structured, but they just go after what they want. The lightning people are all smoke and mirrors. So politicians, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all dangling carrots. It's that old like, oh, look over here while I steal your tax money. Look over here while something else happens. I'm puppeting my left hand. You don't see what I'm doing with my right hand. So those character traits, those qualities, I can really relate to that. I find, and that tends to go hand in hand for me, because I don't naturally want to ride into conflict. I'm more likely to see if I can move chess pieces around to either just negate the situation. If I can put it in my advantage, that would be great, but at a minimum, let's just negate the conflict and I'll move things around. That can often involve, look over there, and then moving out of shot. So, different kind of qualities, different kind of character traits. They're not right or wrong. Obviously, there's fatal flaws to both of them. What I did in the previous talks was I looked at some of they're called shadow aspects. Again, this is like Jungian language. what are the possible pitfalls of those qualities? So if you think about the lightning quality in terms of its manifestation and character, I can talk to you now, you're here, then it's obvious that while it might have an advantage in slipping and sliding and avoiding being impacted, constantly on the move, for how long can you keep that up? Like, that's not something you can do 24 hours a day for 100 years. Eventually, the chickens come home to roost. So at some point in time, it's almost like unless in the middle of your wish smoke and mirrors, you're actually fixing fundamental problems or making fundamental changes that mean that the situation is negated. All you're doing is postponing the inevitable. You're just postponing inevitably, ultimately, one of these times that punch is gonna land in the face, or your smoke and mirrors. Eventually, people are just going to know that that's what you're doing, and their respect for you and their trust for you will erode. So you talk about the shadow aspects of that. If we talk about clay, while it might have its pros and its kind of upfrontness, clearly it lacks intelligent tactics. If you just ride in, if I'm fighting multiple enemies, let's say that I'm a country and I'm surrounded by other countries and I'm at war with every single one of them, and I decide that I am going to put all of my efforts towards one of those borders, and I am really outspoken about that, and I tell everyone and my newspapers, it's on the headlines. Should I really be surprised when I get attacked by the flank? Like, should I really be surprised when the people who I'm riding towards mobilize all of their forces on that 2 meters worth of border that I said, that's where I'm going today, and damn it, I'll be there at 1:51 p.m. And turns out at 1:50, they defended that. And I was like, damn, bugger, my evil plan didn't get to work. So this kind of like ultimate commitment to one super, this is what I want, this is my only outcome. It disintegrates in my attempt, it disintegrates in my ability to maybe even achieve that. Being too upfront means people, especially if it's about something I want, people might just oppose me, especially if they have different opinions. I've seen this play out a lot. Some of the traps for this are in people who, when they adopt that as a character trait, where they're constantly undermining others, seeking to erode the structure that holds up other people, maybe their sense of confidence. What happens is, eventually, they put too many ultimatums on the line, and they don't even get what they want anymore. So in that example with the country, if for whatever reason, they want to attack that border, and they make that such public knowledge so continually, they play out the ultimatum of like, this is either you do what I want, or else. This is, or else I'm going to go to war with you there. Eventually, they push people into just sort of saying like, okay, well, let's just do that then. And they're like, no, no, you misunderstand. What I'm trying to do is bully you. I don't actually want the war. And you see this in relationships, intimate relationships, personal relationships, where one person sort of provides terrible ultimatums to the other that aren't really what that individual would want. It's just how they try to maintain the power play. What happens when the other person just accepts the ultimatum? The whole thing falls apart. It's like it's the boss. How many of you have those examples where the employer is like, you do this or else you're out, and the employee goes, okay, I quit. And the employee's like, no, wait. No, you've totally misunderstood. I was trying to threaten you. I didn't actually want you to leave because that's going to be really, now I have to do the job. Like, that's not good. That's not what I want. So what happens is one of the shadow aspects, one of the real cons to that type of all eggs in the basket position is that often the person who's playing that out, they risk even losing the opportunity of getting what they want anyway. They're too direct. It's too strike until you win kind of thing. And so obviously a relationship of the two. I mean, I can't think of anyone that I've ever met who's only one thing. It'd be really weird. I don't think that'd survive past childhood, but like life as a human just requires too much juggling for anyone to only be one way. But think in your own lives, I can think of lots of people who, if I was to map out, if I put this circle and I was to have to position these people as a little pin on almost like a Venn diagram, where specifically do I think they might fall in a leaning towards, then I could probably pitch them with some relative accuracy, and it might explain other things about them. So like I just said before, this example, and I'm pointing over here because I'm looking at the door, in my example before where I said I don't enjoy riding into conflict. I've certainly had to teach myself how to just take on conflict if my look over there distractions have failed, and eventually I'm in conflict and then I just have to ride into it, and I've had to learn that. Martial arts has helped teach me how to do that. But because I like to avoid conflict, I really hang out on that expanding side. And so it's not surprising that I would exhibit qualities that are kind of windy, lightningy, fiery. Yeah, I'm kind of automatically already in that camp, and so it would be expected that I would be in one of my attempts to avoid conflict. Maybe I'll be distracting or presenting such a myriad of information that it's hard to pin down any particular argument. Wait, didn't you? Hang on. You've said 10 things that I have to respond to. Well, you've only given me time to respond to one of them. And I'm like, yes, that's my plan. And then if that fails, you'll find that you can probably pitch with some relative accuracy what my next backup plans are. And eventually, you will arrive at because it's all a bit unsteady, if that's where I'm coming from, my attack position tends to be quite fiery at the end of the day. It's like distract, fail, confuse, win, move situations, fail, destroy. That's kind of how that goes. And so it's almost like turning on and off. Whereas there are some people I could pitch in different perspectives, and they tend to be more willing to engage in direct conflict and structure. I would say that I could probably hedge my bets that they would also be more able to maintain long-term their eroding techniques. They're probably quite stable in their position, so that they can just set up camp and just consistently start throwing rocks for years, And they set up camp in a quarry, so they're just like chipping away. And if push comes to shove, they fall back on sort of earthy structures and earthy stances where they surround themselves with maybe evidence of their own, I'm not even going to engage these conversations with you because these things are true, or I have 400 people around me who agree with me, and we formed a group, and therefore I'm right, and I'm not going to enter the conversation with you. Whereas the fiery people, they kind of be very alone. The fiery people, it's hard to gather a group of people in a fiery way because you kind of need time to form groups. You can't just sort of run out and be like, hey everyone, in 10 minutes from now 200,000 people have to storm that building. It's not really going to happen. Yeah, you just can't rally the troops. You need to build and develop. So the fiery people, they tend to be loners. They tend to be very alone in their attacks and positions. It's the big earthy people and the clay people who you have to worry about. You got huge groups, institutions that go on for hundreds of years that slowly they got all the time in the world. They keep throwing those rocks. They're just different, not right or wrong. Different. Slow moving. I remember I heard it said about large companies and small companies, and one of the reasons why, it's kind of on this topic, one of the reasons why it's often small companies who innovate and produce new technologies, often, not always. They innovate and produce new technologies, which then rival the existing structure of the large corporations and funnel so much capital and so much interest into the small startups that they grow into a large company, which are then taken out by a new startup. It's because that process is that the larger you get, the slower you can respond. So that the larger and the more intricate and the more complicated your structures become, the slower you can adapt quickly to changes. If you've set up if you're a company who you've pinned your entire position, I can think on a few companies, on one area of the market or one trend in the market, and you've got, supply chains and distribution lines over 30 different countries that are all heavily involved in that market, and then the market just is, the bottom's pulled out of that market, it's going to be very hard for you to mobilize quick change and sort of ride the tops of those waves. If you're a small, tiny startup of 2 people in an office somewhere, and you've got quite a diverse range of capital investment, perhaps in supply chains, well, it's probably going to be easier for you to adapt. And so you end up with, there's just pros and cons, And the business cycle then means that small companies grow into large companies that collapse when the market changes and provides the opportunity for new small companies, and that cycle just rolls on forever. I can think of a number of companies that are quite like centuries old companies, especially in England. And the way that they are still around is because they've built and then they've had to contract rapidly. Something changes and they contract back to like a smaller version of themselves. And then maybe they pivot, reimagine how they want to present, and then build up again. Another 50 years goes by, and then something happens in that market it's no longer viable for them. They contract again, and it's like these companies have survived not because they stayed large the whole time, but they oscillated between slow moving structures and quick moving structures, and I think about the dojo in that sense, and it would be great. I mean, the Rainy Spirit Dojo's kind of done that in a very micro way. We've been very small, we've swelled quite large, we've contracted quite small, we've swelled quite large, we've contracted quite small. And this year's been another example of that. The dojo and myself as the head and making the decisions, it was like, well, the swell out that we had that built to this position, this factory, this space, in this particular way, putting all the eggs in that market, what happened to the market? The market was eradicated overnight. The ability for that to continue, and the supply chains, and that whole experience wiped out. Bam! March 27th, sorry, letter from the government, you have to stop what you're doing. It's like, The whole ship, and imagine it's like a big boat. 3/4 of the boat break off and sink beneath the waves. And it's like, that's okay, so long as that was just kind of cargo, and you take some losses. But at the helm, what do? You steer off, you're a lot lighter, you shoot off in a direction, you repivot. And so the dojo just pivoted, and we're just having to pivot around. And I know lots of people in similar positions, different industries. Whereas, think of the companies in the last sort of 7 months. Think of the NASDAQ companies, think of Amazon, who've just continued to build their supply chains. And it's all e-commerce and it's all online. It's like the market change was totally in their favor. Can you imagine what would happen if next year, for whatever reason, huge solar flares caused the internet to be disrupted for 7 months and there's no internet connectivity for the next 7 months? Amazon would collapse overnight. In terms of their market, that infrastructure would just vaporize. They're too large and too indebted to be able to maneuver quick enough to be able to suddenly go back to face-to-face, ma and pa commerce kind of shops. So these things are always coming and going, and the question is more, it's not whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing or how that plays out. We get back to strategy. The whole purpose of the dojo is empowered understanding of strategy to make choices that lead to your survival. Where are you personally, and maybe your businesses or your family or your investments or your understanding or your use of martial arts, where are you in relationship to these trends? And do you need to maybe increase your adaptability, or are all your eggs in one basket? Would it be worth reviewing, perhaps, and I don't even just mean physically, perhaps a slightly different way of presenting? You know, if things have moved very, very politically this year, if you are very upfront about, you know, in a public setting, about your political viewpoints, has that been a disadvantageous experience for you this year? Have you had to been able to pivot? What would it have been like if you have run 2 news anchor programs and you argue on both sides, whichever political party wins? You're still in business. You know, it's just interesting thinking about that from our own perspective. If we become too fixed, too rigid, and kind of form in this chrysalis around one way of being, we will always perish. Doesn't matter which of those you choose. Doesn't matter whether it's like earthy structures or clay structures or watery structures or qualities of mist or wind or lightning or fire or metal. It doesn't actually matter, because they're all constantly in motion with each other and moving, and they're called phases. They're not called static positions. Like spring, it's like if you were just, imagine if you set up a business and it could only survive in summer. It's like, well, that's cool, but what are you going to do for the other, 9 months of the year? You know, you're gonna need, maybe you're going to need to diversify a little bit. Maybe that's not going to work very well. Or if you've just got a way, and I've said this before in the videos, if you have a way of being in your personal relationship and it's not working anymore, if it's only further causing the destruction of your personal relationship, if that's not what you want, maybe it's time to try something else. Whether or not you think that it will work is irrelevant. It's just time to shift gear and change phases. It's time to try something out. If you've been a student of the dojo, hopefully you've looped the cycles enough that you've got some rough idea of how to do that. What it could be like to take a fiery approach all of a sudden. Or what it could feel like if you internalized your earthy, strong structure into your conflict management or your argument with someone. You know, if you've been riding in as the lightning, look over there, look over there, look over there. Yes, I know there's this thing that I need to take responsibility for, but I've got 10 other things I want to talk to you about today. It's like, if that's quickly eroding and you can see that the train's heading, you know, towards the inevitable conclusion, maybe it's worth trying something different and just seeing what happens, seeing what the outcomes are. If you're the clay person who's, you know, you've been demanding your ultimatums, making huge, massive threats, and all that's happened is everyone's against you, and that your inevitable end, you'll starve to death because no one will trade food with you anymore, and Woolworths refuse to serve you, you know, and you just perish in the car park. Maybe before it gets to that point, it's worth pivoting a phase and just trying something else. You know, what if you were, and you know this because when people do this, it totally throws us. Think of a conflict that you've had with someone, and they've been a certain way, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, they just alter their position, and it totally throws you, because you've prepared, you and your lawyers sat down, and you've been fighting this out for 4 years, and then you prepared, and then you go in, and you start the same conversation, the same dialogue, and you're not even listening to them because you know you already know what the script says, and they just totally throw you a curveball. You gotta think quick. There was an example, I think I might have even said this back in March in one of these videos. An example, my father was a solicitor. There was a funny example he used to tell me about in this vein of thinking. He said there was a murder, it was a murder trial in America. He never went into details. And he said what it was that there was an individual. It was a murder where it was a relationship. The other person had been killed off, and the prime suspect was their partner. And this thing had been going on between lawyers of both sides for years, for like a year and a half or 2 years, trying to get incriminating evidence, pulling little threads. Everything's like just every little bit of fluff that could be used to twist towards their particular agenda. And this person who was the primary suspect always denied. No, it wasn't me. You have no evidence for that. No, blah blah blah. One time, the lawyers for the prosecution, they come in again, they've got their whole, they've got like a textbook. They've worked out, he says this, we say that, she says that, we say this, and they've got their little script. They get up, it's the opening question in the court, and they say to the person, could you confirm where you were on the 5th of April at 7 p.m? And the person has just decided they've had enough. They burst into tears, they say, yes, it was me, I killed them. And the lawyer from the prosecutor says, aha! You admit you were at their house. And the whole court's quiet because the prosecution didn't even hear the response. It was so out of character that they couldn't even, it's not even on their register. Never in a million years were they expecting the person not only to have a change of heart, but to break down and fully admit guilt to the press. The lawyer continues on a train about how it was 7 o'clock, not 7:05, but in their previous statement. And it's not until the actual judge comments, gets the defendant to reiterate again what they just said, that the plaintiff even hears what they said. And I think that was a really good example for me of how when we enter into our little narrative, I say this and they say that and you say that and I respond like this, we're no longer really having a relationship with someone. Whether we're talking about, we're no longer even, as an employer and an employee, you're no longer actually, having any kind of relationship if it's just the script. And while there's certain scenarios where that might be great, intimate relationships aren't one. Martial arts is not another, because people will trap you with that. If you study any martial arts where their attempt is to create synchronicity, you want to create synchrony, it's called, so that you bounce, they bounce, and you do this in such a way that you trap them into a pattern and then you change the pattern. We have this in bow techniques. You think of bow kata 1, where you play out the same pattern of attack like 4 times, and then on the 5th time you change it and hit them in the head. And the goal is to entrain the other individual to play the script. You're attacking, they're defending. That's the role. They get into that role and they defend, and then they go, that again, yet that again, yet that again, yet that again, yet that. And then they go to block something that's not even there. They go to block low, and they haven't even looked to see if you were going to attack low. They just, it's the script. You're going to attack low, so they block low. They block low, and you whack them out in the face. And they don't even see it coming. They probably couldn't even recollect any visualization of the bow hurling towards their face, because they're just completely oblivious to it. And I like to think, okay, it's good to remind us in martial arts, you just want to be in a constant dialogue, constantly back and forward, so that when someone suddenly changes something, there's no delay in your response. You're already there. Like you can just return your response to that. Or when things change, you can pivot in your personal relationships. Or when the other person changes, your partner, you've been together for 30 years, you're different people than you were when you first met. And there should be maybe there's a pivoting. Maybe the same expectations don't apply anymore, or maybe the same. You hired someone from you had a particular vantage of skills, and they didn't. But it's been 20 years, and they've gained all of the same skill set that you have, and then some, maybe in a different area. Maybe it's time to really evaluate that relationship. Is that when you offer them, you say, hey, do you want to be a partner in the business? Like all of a sudden change the dialogue, and you'll find that the responses that you get from someone completely alter. So we went off topic slightly from just clay and lightning, but talking about the application of that. I look forward to seeing you guys in the dojo. It's bang on 9 o'clock, or 8 o'clock. I don't even know. Oh no, I haven't changed the clock for daylight savings. So this video is starting in -1 minute from now. Have a good weekend. I will see you next Wednesday for the meditation video. Next Friday, we've got an awesome podcast, so keep an eye out for that. And then I'll be providing information on the group on the page and the newsletter, the email, because we'll be back to training in the park for groups up to 10 students at a time, and it will be in one of the public reserves around research near the dojo. So look out for that. It'll be the first Wednesday of November that we start that. And there's a high chance that it will be adult sessions from 7 o'clock to 8:30, because we're going to have to catch the sunlight. So it's going to require some juggling. Have a good weekend. Good luck.